Remember the exact moment I stopped trusting my own memory. It was a Tuesday. I know because Tuesday was the day my wife drove herself to her sister's place for what she called a standing dinner, something that had started maybe 8 months before and that I had never once questioned. I was 63 years old, retired from 31 years as a civil engineer, and I believed I was the kind of man who noticed things. I had built bridges. I had read load-bearing charts and soil composition reports and known when something was about to give way before it actually did. I did not see this coming. The call came at 6:14 in the evening. I was sitting in the recliner my daughter had given me for Christmas 2 years ago, the one with the heating element in the lumbar that I used more than I ever admitted. The news was on. I was half watching, half dozing, the way men my age do when they've stopped pretending otherwise. My phone buzzed on the side table. The number wasn't saved. Area code I recognized, same county. I picked up because I always pick up. My father raised me that way. You answer the phone. Is this the residence of... And then my name, my full name, middle initial included, the way only official people say it. I said yes. This is the Mercer County Sheriff's Department. We've received a complaint against you, sir. A restraining order has been filed. We need to make you aware that you are legally prohibited from coming within 500 feet of your wife or her listed addresses, effective as of 3 o'clock this afternoon. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I was sitting in a chair my daughter bought me. The television was on. The house smelled like the pot roast I'd put in the slow cooker at noon. My wife's reading glasses were on the kitchen counter, next to the grocery list she'd written that morning. Ground turkey, low-sodium broth, the particular brand of yogurt she liked. "I'm sorry," I said. "I think there's been some kind of mistake." There had not been a mistake. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the 18 months that came before it. My wife and I had been married for 38 years when this happened. We met in 1985 at a church picnic in western Pennsylvania. She was 24. I was 25. She laughed at something her friend said, and I thought, that's the sound I want to hear for the rest of my life, and I was not wrong. We had 2 children. We buried her mother and then mine. We moved 3 times, stayed in the same county for the last 22 years, watched our neighborhood change and held our ground. We had a good life. Not a perfect life. We were 2 stubborn people with different ideas about money and closet space and how loud a television should be, but a good one. When I retired, things shifted. That's the only way I know to say it. Shifted. Not broke. Not fell apart. Shifted, like a house settling. Little cracks in the plaster you notice and file away and tell yourself are cosmetic. She started going out more. That's not unusual. I knew retirement would be harder for her to navigate than for me, because I had always needed more solitude and she had always needed more people. She joined a book club. She started having lunch with a friend named, I'll call her a friend, a woman she'd known from church for maybe 3 years, more frequently. The standing Tuesday dinners with her sister started in the fall. I didn't ask many questions. I had been accused over the years of being too independent, too content with my own company. I was trying to give her space. That's what I told myself. The first real sign I missed was the phone. She had always been careless with her phone, left it on the counter, left it in the car, left it face up on the coffee table. Suddenly she was keeping it in her pocket or her purse, always face down when she set it anywhere. I noticed. I didn't say anything. I told myself she'd probably just downloaded some game she was embarrassed about. The second sign was the mileage. I did the oil changes myself. I always have. In March, I changed the oil and wrote down the mileage the way I always do. I keep a small notebook in the garage. 3 months later, in June, I changed it again. The mileage was 6,400 miles more than I would have expected, given what she'd told me about where she'd been going. I did the math twice. Then I did it a 3rd time. I didn't say anything. I told myself maybe I'd miscounted. Maybe I'd written down the wrong number in March. I was 63. I forgot things sometimes. The 3rd sign was a name. She mentioned a man's name in a context that didn't quite fit. We were talking about a home repair, something about the cost of replacing the gutters, and she said almost absently, "Someone I know said you can get those done for under 1,500 if you find the right contractor." I asked who. She paused just a beat too long and said a name. The name didn't match anyone she'd mentioned before. I asked if it was someone from church, and she said no, just someone she'd met through a mutual acquaintance. I didn't ask anything else. I want to be honest here. I was not innocent of avoidance. I was afraid of what I might find. 38 years is not something you unpack casually. I kept thinking, if I just give it time, if I just stay steady, things will settle back the way they were. I had been an engineer. I believed in structural integrity. I believed things could be reinforced. I was wrong. In August, I had a health scare. It started with chest pain I'd been ignoring for about 2 weeks. The kind of dull, persistent ache you attribute to everything except what it might actually be when you're a man my age who doesn't want to sit in a waiting room. My daughter finally cornered me at a Sunday dinner and told me I looked gray. She's a nurse. She didn't phrase it as a suggestion. I went to the cardiologist the following Monday. They ran tests. They found a partial blockage. Not a crisis, but not nothing. They scheduled me for a procedure, an angioplasty, outpatient, but requiring observation. I went in on a Wednesday. My wife drove me. I was kept overnight due to my blood pressure running higher than they wanted. One night became 2. Then, on the second evening, this would have been a Thursday, my daughter came to see me after her shift ended. She sat with me for a couple of hours. We talked. It was actually one of the better conversations we'd had in years, the kind that only seems to happen when someone's been recently reminded that time is finite. She left around 9. My wife had gone home at dinner time. That was fine. I told her to. There was nothing to do at the hospital, and she didn't sleep well in strange places. And I had my phone and the call button and a view of the parking garage that I found inexplicably calming. At 6:14 the following evening, Friday, the sheriff's department called. I had not left that hospital. I had not left that floor. I had not, in any technical sense, left that bed except to use the bathroom 6 feet away. I had a blood pressure cuff on my arm that logged readings every 4 hours. I had 2 nurses who knew my name and my chart and my preference for apple juice over orange juice. I had my daughter who had visited again that afternoon and brought me a paperback I hadn't asked for and a bag of pretzels from the vending machine. And according to my wife, I had been following her to her sister's house, to a restaurant in Bridgewater, to a parking lot in Flemington, over 3 weeks, documenting her movements, leaving a note on her windshield, coming to the door of a house she had listed as a safe location and demanding entry. I had done none of these things. I had been for 2 of those 3 weeks in my recliner with a cardiac monitoring device strapped to my chest, under explicit instructions not to exert myself. And for the final portion of that period, I had been in a hospital bed in room 214 of Mercer General, with a wristband and a chart and a blood pressure log, and a daughter who had held my hand and told me that I scared her and that she was glad I was okay. The deputy on the phone was not unkind. He was doing his job. But he could not, he explained, come to the hospital to verify my presence there. That was not how this worked. The order had been filed and processed. I needed to comply. I needed to find somewhere else to stay when I was discharged. I hung up and I looked at the ceiling for a long time. Then I did what engineers do. I started documenting. I called my daughter that night. I told her what had happened in the flattest voice I could manage, because if I let myself feel it fully in that moment, I wasn't sure I'd be able to speak at all. She was quiet for longer than I expected. Then she said, "Dad, she did this while you were in the hospital." "Yes." Another silence. "She knew you were here. She drove me here." My daughter came back to the hospital the next morning with her husband. Her husband, who, bless him, is a man of few words but considerable competence. He works in commercial insurance and understands documentation the way I understand load tolerances. He brought a notepad. The three of us sat in room 214 and made a list. Hospital admission records, time-stamped entry, room assignment, procedure notes, nursing logs, blood pressure readings every 4 hours, medication administration records, the names of the nurses on each shift, visitor log. My daughter had signed in both times she came. Security footage. The hospital had cameras in every hallway, every elevator, every entrance and exit. I had not appeared on any footage outside this room except to walk, slowly, with my daughter's hand on my elbow, to the family lounge at the end of the hall on Thursday afternoon. My cardiac monitoring device had transmitted data wirelessly. There was a continuous record of my heart rate, my blood pressure, my oxygen levels, logged at regular intervals by a machine that did not care about anything except numbers. I had not been in Bridgewater. I had not been in Flemington. I had not left a note on anyone's windshield. I had not stood at any door demanding anything. What I had been was a 63-year-old man recovering from a cardiac procedure, alone in a hospital room on a Friday evening, watching the parking garage lights come on one by one as the sun went down, wondering what 38 years had actually been. I want to tell you what I found out, because the comment I made to my daughter's husband that weekend was this: there's a difference between what you suspect and what you can prove. And there's a difference between what you can prove and what you can live with, knowing. I hired a private investigator before I hired an attorney. I want to be honest about the order, because the order matters. The PI was a woman, mid-50s, based out of Trenton, recommended by a former colleague of mine who had gone to a divorce some years earlier. She was not theatrical about it. She sat across from me in a Panera booth. I had been discharged by then. I was staying at my daughter's house, and she asked me clear questions and wrote down clear answers and said she would be in touch. She was in touch within 10 days. The man whose name my wife had mentioned in passing, the gutter conversation, the name that hadn't quite fit, was a divorced man, 57, who lived in a development in Montgomery Township. He had retired early from a pharmaceutical sales position. He drove a silver SUV. He and my wife had, by the PI's account, been in contact for approximately 14 months. The Tuesday dinners at her sister's house, her sister, when the PI spoke with her indirectly through a pretext call, had no standing Tuesday dinner, had not, apparently, had dinner with my wife on a regular basis in quite some time. The house listed on the restraining order as a safe location, one of them, was his address. Let me say that again clearly, because I needed it said to me clearly before I could hold it. My wife had filed a restraining order listing as one of her safe locations, the home of the man she had been seeing for over a year. I sat with that information for a full day before I did anything else. I found an attorney through the County Bar Association's referral line. He was a family law attorney with 26 years of experience, a small office in Hamilton Township, and the kind of demeanor that reminded me of my old project managers, the ones who had seen enough disasters to stop being surprised by them without ever becoming callous. I brought him the hospital records, the monitoring data, the visitor logs, the security footage which the hospital's legal department had agreed to preserve pending potential litigation, the PI's preliminary report. He looked at everything, made notes, and then looked at me over his reading glasses. "She filed this while you were inpatient," he said. "Yes." "And listed a third party's residence as a safe location." "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Okay, here's what we're going to do." The process took 4 months. I won't pretend it was clean or fast, or that there were no moments where I sat in my daughter's guest bedroom at 2 in the morning looking at the ceiling and feeling something I didn't have a word for. It wasn't quite grief. It wasn't quite rage. It was something older and quieter. The specific weight of realizing that the story you'd been telling yourself about your own life had a chapter in it you hadn't read. The restraining order was vacated at the first hearing. The evidence was not ambiguous. A man with a continuous cardiac monitoring record and a documented hospital stay of 72 hours cannot simultaneously have been surveilling someone across 3 counties. The judge did not belabor the point. She reviewed the materials, asked a few brief questions, and vacated the order. She also made a note on the record regarding the filing of the safe location address, which my attorney had flagged as potentially constituting perjury. That note mattered later. My wife's attorney at the first settlement conference came in with a position that suggested she expected the same leverage the restraining order would have provided if it had held. My attorney quietly laid out what we had: the PI's report, the phone records which had been subpoenaed as part of the divorce proceeding, text messages going back 14 months, photographs with geotag data, a pattern of communication that included, on several occasions, discussions about what would happen when things were settled. The settlement conference lasted 6 hours. I won't tell you I felt victorious at the end of it. I felt tired in a way I still haven't entirely recovered from, but I felt for the first time in 4 months like the ground under me was solid. The divorce was finalized in February. I won't go into every detail of what was decided, but I'll say this: the house stayed mine. The retirement accounts were divided by an amount that reflected, in the court's language, dissipation of marital assets during the period in question, which is the legal term for the money that had gone, in ways that were now documented, toward 14 months of a life she'd been living outside our marriage. She did not receive what she would have received if the story had been different. The perjury notation resulted in a formal referral to the county prosecutor's office. I don't know what came of that. I made a decision not to follow it too closely. That wasn't the part I needed to control. My daughter asked me a few weeks after the finalization if I was okay. We were in her kitchen. She was making coffee. Her husband was somewhere else in the house doing something useful, the way he always is. I thought about the question for a moment. "I'm not sure okay is the right word," I said, "but I'm clearer than I was." She turned around and looked at me the way she used to look at me when she was a teenager, and I had said something she was deciding whether to push back on. "I think she thought she had you figured out," she said. "She thought you'd just not fight it, not document, not push." I thought about that. She wasn't wrong about the version of me that existed before August. That man had spent 18 months noticing things and not saying them, had changed oil and done math and told himself he'd miscounted, had given space when what was actually called for was a direct conversation. That man had also, in a hospital bed on a Friday evening, made a list. I think what I've learned, and I'm 63 years old, which means I'm still learning things I maybe should have known sooner, is that being calm is not the same thing as being absent. I was calm through all of it: the phone call, the documentation, the PI, the hearings, the settlement. I did not raise my voice. I did not threaten. I did not do any of the things I was accused of doing. But I was not absent. And that, in the end, was what made the difference. I'm living in the house now. The gutters needed replacing, as it turned out. I found a contractor who did it for $1,200, which I thought was reasonable. I put the receipts in a folder in my filing cabinet, next to my discharge paperwork from Mercer General and the finalized divorce decree and the PI's report with its photographs and timestamps and geotag coordinates. I keep things. I always have. I've been thinking about the notebook in my garage, the one where I write down mileage every time I change the oil. Small, spiral-bound, the kind you can buy in a pack of 3 at any drugstore. I've kept one for years, not because anyone told me to, not because I expected to ever need it, but because that's how I was raised. You write things down. You keep the record. I didn't know when I wrote that number in March that it would become evidence. That's the thing about living with integrity that nobody tells you when you're young. It doesn't feel like preparation. It just feels like habit. You do the honest thing because it's the honest thing. You document because documentation is orderly. You tell the truth in small moments because it costs you nothing. And then one day it costs you everything not to have done it. My wife counted on a version of me that I had been, for too long, allowing to exist. A man who noticed and stayed quiet. Who did the math and told himself he'd miscounted. That man wasn't dishonest. He was afraid. And fear dressed up as patience is still just fear. What I understand now, sitting in this house with the new gutters and the filing cabinet and the discharge paperwork from Mercer General, is that genuine character isn't just about being good. It's about being present. It's about being willing to look at what's actually in front of you, even when you don't want to. My daughter's husband, a man of few words, which I respect, brought a notepad to the hospital and sat with me and helped me make a list. That list became the foundation of everything that came after. And the reason it worked, the reason the list meant something, was because the facts were already there. The records existed. The monitoring data existed. The security footage existed. I had not fabricated an alibi because I hadn't needed to. I had simply lived my life honestly, and honesty had left a trail. It is a kind of intelligence that isn't about knowing more than other people. It's about understanding what you're actually looking at. I spent 18 months looking at signs and choosing not to read them. The mileage, the phone, the name that didn't fit. I told myself I was being calm. What I was actually being was willfully blind. The difference matters. Clarity isn't comfortable, but it is the only foundation that holds. And then there was what happened in that hospital room, the part I returned to most. I could have fallen apart. I had, by any measure, earned the right to fall apart. Instead, I called my daughter. I made a list. I found a pie and then a lawyer, and I walked, slowly, through every step of what came next. Not because I felt strong, because I decided that falling apart was not an option I was willing to choose. That decision, quiet, unannounced, made alone in a room overlooking a parking garage, was the most important one I made in this entire ordeal. The restraining order was vacated. The marriage ended. The woman I had built a life with for 38 years had made her choices, and those choices had consequences, documented and permanent. I don't carry bitterness about it, not anymore. Bitterness is just grief that forgot to move. What I carry instead is the notebook, and the knowledge that the life I lived, carefully, honestly, with my eyes mostly open, was exactly the evidence I needed when it mattered most.